Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes for Gladys to come online. It's great to see some Whitley Award alumni joining in as well. Hi everyone, thanks for all the waves. Hi Farweeza, nice to see you. And I think Gladys is now with us, so I would just try and add her here. Hi!
Hi, how are you,
I'm good.
Lydia?
See you again.
Yes. How's everything?
Yeah, really well. How are you doing? I can see that
Fine,
it's
thank you.
quite dark with you. It's still quite light here. We've still got some
Yes,
sunshine.
yeah, it's getting darker here.
Brilliant. So I suppose we can kind of go ahead and start. Before we dive right in, obviously there's just a bit of housekeeping. So the chat should last about half an hour. And please do feel free to ask questions in the comment box, and we will do our best to get to all of them at the end. But if your question wasn't answered, or you have any further questions for Gladys or for us at WFN, just drop us a DM and we will get back to you. So my name is Lydia and I am Operations Officer at WFN, and it is my absolute pleasure to formally introduce you to Whitley Gold Award winner Dr. Gladys Kalema Zikusoka. And Gladys,
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me.
oh, it's so happy to have you here. So Gladys is Uganda's first wildlife vet and is the founder and CEO of Conservation Through Public Health, or CTPH, as we'll probably be referring to it today. And for those of you who don't know us, we are the Whitley Fund for Nature, and we offer funding, profile, and training to grassroots conservation leaders across the global south. And to give you some context about our relationship with Gladys, Gladys won the Whitley Gold Award in 2009 for her amazing work protecting mountain gorillas in Uganda with her public health initiative. And with that project, she's gone on to receive WFN continuation funding in 2011 and again in 2019. So I think that's plenty from me for now. So Gladys, perhaps you could start us off by telling us a bit more about CTPH.
Yes, Conservation Through Public Health was founded in 2003 together with my husband Lawrence Zikusoka and a vet technician called Stephen Rubanga. And we founded it based on my experiences as the first vet for the Uganda Wildlife Authority, where one of the very first cases I had to handle was a scabies skin disease in the critically endangered mountain gorillas. And although I was hired because they were concerned about diseases coming from tourists, such as something like COVID-19, actually the very first disease that affected the Bwindi gorillas and resulted in a baby gorilla dying was a disease from the local community. We found out that whenever the gorillas go out to eat banana plants, they find dirty clothing on scarecrows, touch it, and that's how the scabies mites went through the gorillas, and the rest only recovered with treatment. And then later on, a few years later, another scabies outbreak occurred in another gorilla group that was always going out, the Nkuringo gorilla group. And so we realized then that we really needed to set up an NGO that can improve the health of the people as well as the gorillas and other wildlife. And that's why we started CTPH.
Amazing. And something you speak about quite a lot when referring to your project is the One Health approach to conservation. And for those of us who maybe don't know what that means, could you explain a little bit more about it?
Yes, One Health is a relatively new concept, but it addresses human health, animal health, and ecosystem health together. So at CTPH, we have a One Health approach to gorilla conservation, where we basically improve community health and animal health together. And we also add alternative livelihoods because we found that many people are unhealthy because they're poor. And collectively, we're able to promote biodiversity conservation because we directly prevent disease from people to great apes, such as the mountain gorillas. And then we also improve pre-post attitudes to conservation because we're addressing healthcare, which is a basic human need. So they feel that we don't only care about the wildlife, the animals and the forests, but we also care about them as well. So that's kind of the whole One Health approach. And we've been so glad that Whitley Fund for Nature has supported so much of our One Health work. Yeah, we're really pleased about that. One of the very first things that Whitley Fund for Nature did after winning the Whitley Gold Award was to enable us to start the Hygiene and Sanitation program within CTPH. And so that's when we really started that. And we worked with local volunteers from the local community, trained them to do both health and conservation work. And they go out to visit people's homes, make sure that they're having hand washing facilities, the proper toilets, drinking proper water. And all of this helps them to improve the hygiene, because a lot of infectious diseases like scabies, tuberculosis, diarrhea all come about because of poor hygiene. So we're really pleased about that. And the Whitley Fund for Nature has also helped us to really strengthen our gorilla health monitoring program, where we regularly collect fecal samples from gorillas every month, the habituated groups, and the gorilla census when it happens every 5 years. And we compare what we're finding in the gorillas and the people and the livestock to make sure that they're not picking up diseases from each other, and address it before it becomes too bad. So that's one program that has really helped. And we do it concurrently with, as we're improving community behavior towards healthcare and even things like family planning, we're also checking to make sure that they're getting healthier as they go along.
Fantastic, thank you. And you mentioned in your post today that tourism plays a really key role in the protection of mountain gorillas in Uganda. I wonder if you could explain a bit more about the role of tourism in Burundi in particular.
Yes, tourism plays a very big role in protecting the mountain gorillas. Actually, you find that the places where gorilla tourism is thriving is the only place where the gorilla populations are actually growing, because tourism provides an economic incentive for people to take care of gorillas. So whereas before they would enter the forest to poach other animals and come across gorillas and just spear them or kill them because they don't see that they have any value, or whereas they would go in to collect firewood and destroy the gorillas' habitat, they now realize that without the gorillas, they won't be lifted out of poverty. So, for example, when gorillas go into people's gardens now, people are much more tolerant, they're less likely to kill them, and they'll just put up with it because they know that actually, because of this gorilla, my children are able to go to school, because some of the revenue from tourism goes to support the local communities and has helped to build schools and clinics. And also people know that because of the gorilla, my child has a job. 90% of the park staff at Burundi are from the local community. And even other ways that the tourism industry helps. For example, when you go tracking the gorillas, I know Danny has been gorilla tracking with her husband. Most of the times you hire a porter because it doesn't matter how fit you are. You may get very tired carrying your bags, and also coming down, you may fall. And more importantly, you're supporting the local economy. And these porters get a day's wage from you hiring them to take up your bags. And what they get in one day, the community would get in 1 month. So all of these things make people really appreciate conservation. Some of them provide food, crafts, meals, accommodation, those who are entrepreneur. And on top of the children going to school, basically gorilla tourism has really helped to start to lift the Burundi community out of poverty. And when the community is not poor or they're less needy, they're less likely to go into the park, to poach, to collect firewood and destroy the gorilla's habitat.
Absolutely. And I think leading on from that, there's obviously a huge amount of responsibility on the tourists to practice responsible tourism. And you mentioned that again today as one of your kind of key pieces of advice for people who might one day wish to have the opportunity to come and see the gorillas. So on like a broader perspective, I wonder what responsible tourism means for you, both in terms of animal health and welfare and also the community impact.
Yes, it means both of those. Actually, when I just started working with the mountain gorillas, my idea of responsible tourism was just treading lightly, making sure that you don't get too close to them to make them sick. I was actually, when I was hired as the first vet for the Uganda Wildlife Authority for that very reason, because gorilla tourism had just begun, I knew that we really need to enforce those rules. And a lady called Dr. Liz McPhee, who was a vet from Mountain Gorilla Vet Project in Rwanda, was now heading International Gorilla Conservation Program. And she really helped to mentor me. And so we really made sure that people don't get too close to gorillas because they can make them sick. And that was the main focus. If you're ill, you don't go up. And then later on, I realized that it wasn't just about treading lightly, but it was also about making sure that local communities are part of the tourism, the ecotourism experience, because they also needed to benefit in order to complete the whole cycle of responsible tourism. So at Conservation Through Public Health, we promote both. We try our best to make sure that the rules are enforced, and we work closely with the Uganda Wildlife Authority and other conservation partners to make sure that tourists don't get too close, or the gorillas don't get compromised by, people just want you to get too close. And that's one thing we really focused on. And within our community tourism part, one thing that we did is we started to get people involved in gorilla conservation coffee, which is we're supporting coffee farmers around the park. As you're tracking gorillas, you cross coffee farms, and we realized that they don't get a steady market or a steady price. And we felt that we needed to start supporting them as well. And we knew that they also don't always benefit from tourism, because not everybody can be a ranger or a porter or a guide. And so what we do is we offer them above market prices for good coffee, which we can then sell. Fortunately, the coffee there is very good because it's at a high altitude. So we have very good Arabica coffee, which is at a high altitude. Actually, here's a photograph of it. Gorilla conservation coffee. And so what we do is we give them an above market price, and a donation from every bag sold goes to support the work of CTPH. So there's some information there. It supports the community health, the gorilla health, and the conservation education work. So in that way, we're able to engage the communities in tourism.
And I know that a sort of key part of that project is working specifically with female coffee farmers. And that's something which is obviously important to you. Maybe you could tell us a bit more about why.
Yes, we find that it's very important to work with female coffee farmers, and generally to work with women in conservation, because if you only work with the men, you're missing half the story and half the impact. So we find that it's very important to engage women, and 1/3 of our coffee farmers are women. We also engage women very strongly in our Village Health and Conservation Team program, where we work with the community health workers and teach them to do conservation work. So we actually have 51% are women and 49% are men at the moment. So we've got the gender balance exactly right over there.
Amazing. Which is the And obviously gorilla conservation coffee now, for people who are UK and listening in, is now available to buy in the UK. And you can have a look on Twitter on Gladys's page on CTPH, and there are some links there to where you can get some gorilla conservation coffee. And Danny, who's our director, when she visited Gladys last year, she brought some back, and it was absolutely delicious. So I can definitely vouch for that.
Yes, you can sell it. Maniro Beans was our first distributor in the UK, and they happened to become our first distributor during the COVID-19 pandemic. Because unfortunately, as I mentioned, we've been able to engage the coffee farmers because of tourism. When tourists come to trek the mountain gorillas, they're able to buy the coffee because they really want to support the local community who they meet when they come. And a lot of the lodges are buying the coffee because they see where it's coming from. But unfortunately, with the COVID-19 pandemic, because of the fact that we can easily make gorillas and chimpanzees sick, and also the lockdowns all over the world with what was happening, this horrible pandemic, we found tourism was suspended in Uganda and many other countries in Africa. And that meant that the local community could no longer benefit from tourism. And we started wondering that, can we really afford to buy coffee from the farmers when we have nowhere to sell it? But thankfully, we came across Maniro Beans. We were introduced to Vicky by some people who were actually as a task finalist. And when I went to give a talk somewhere, I met somebody who knew Vicky, who owns Maniro Beans. So through that experience, I was able to get in touch with her, and she said she would buy some coffee. So in May, she ordered the first coffee, and it got to her, people bought it. And people realized also, when I was on the Ape Alliance panel in April, I said people can still support the gorillas even if you're not able to visit them. You can buy coffee and support them, because the money that you give the coffee farmer stops them having to go into the park to poach. to collect firewood. So people started buying the coffee, and she's already got a second order. It arrived a few days ago. And so we're really pleased that through Maniro Beans, we're able to continue to support the community, even if there's no tourism in Bwindi right now.
Yeah, and that's brilliant that people in the UK are able to kind of get involved from over here. I know that for me, coffee's been a real lifesaver during lockdown. So I think I can see why the sales would have definitely gone up over this.
Yes.
Speaking about coronavirus, do you, and sort of the lack of tourism now, what are your expectations in terms of when you think tourism might be able to kind of come back, and what measures have you got in place for kind of ensuring safe tourism when it is safe to do so?
Yes, we're expecting tourism maybe, yep, it's a very good question, but I think the risks have to be assessed. We have to first understand what's the level of COVID-19 amongst the people where the gorillas are found, and in the country in general. The cases are still going up, but we have much fewer cases than you have in the UK, and I'm so sorry about the so many cases you've had there. We have less than 900 cases right now. But these are confirmed cases. These are people who have been tested. So the government, the Ministry of Health, is still trying to determine how safe it is for activities like primate tourism to happen. Tourism to savannah parks has begun, but to primates specifically, the president of Uganda himself said, we do not want to make our cousins, the gorillas and the chimpanzees, sick. So we're not opening for primate tourism yet. We still have to wait and assess the risks. So for the time being, we're waiting to see what will happen. But the measures that have been put in place as soon as the COVID-19 pandemic began, and the first case got to Uganda, we got together with the other conservation NGOs and worked closely with the Uganda Wildlife Authority, who asked us to train their rangers on how not to give COVID to the gorillas and how to prevent it amongst themselves. So we enforced the rules that were already there, and we added extra rules. So people all have to wear masks when they visit the gorillas, because we found with research which we conducted with people from Ohio University and from University of Kent, we found that people get too close to gorillas. But also tourists had said that they were willing to wear masks during this research. So what we did is we trained everybody how to maintain the 7-meter distance, which is what it is now, but it's actually going to go up to 10 meters. And then also when people go to visit the gorillas, they have to wear masks, because the gorillas just kept, either the tourists were breaking the rules or the gorillas were breaking the rules, because they get so used to people and they're very curious. And in fact, the one that I showed on the coffee package, Kanyonyi, my favorite gorilla over here, he really liked getting close to tourists because he had seen them since he was a baby. And so, but if you're wearing a mask, you're less likely to make them sick. And we also found that cloth masks are just as good, because the surgical masks and the N95 masks are more for the medical workers. And cloth masks with a double layer are almost as good as a surgical mask. So we got the local entrepreneur in the area, Ride for a Woman, which is owned by a lady called Evelyn and her husband Dennis, and they hire lots of local women. She had laid them all off when COVID-19 pandemic began and there were no tourists to make crafts and local nice tablecloths. So we got her to start to make masks using the health guidelines for making cloth masks. So she made masks for all the park staff, and then she also made masks for the gorilla guardians who we work with, and the village health and conservation teams, and anybody there. And when tourism begins, she will also be available to make masks for tourists if they'd like to support the local community as well. And one other thing that has been brought is that everybody's temperature has to be taken before they track the gorillas, because the very first index case we had in Uganda, which was a returning Ugandan from Dubai, he had a very high temperature, but he didn't have a cough or a cold. And that was how they were able to detect that COVID-19 has arrived Uganda. And so that's another thing. Even the park staff now, during the absence of tourism, have to check on the gorillas every day, because they have to make sure they're healthy and they're safe. And they're safe from poachers as well. So they have to have their temperatures taken before they go in, they have to wear a mask, and they have to be healthy. And of course, there's a lot of washing of hands and hand sanitizers before you actually go into the gorillas. So we hope that with all these measures, the gorillas will be protected when tourism begins again.
And I suppose even after the coronavirus pandemic, has come to an end, having those sort of much more strict sort of sanitation procedures in place might actually be sort of good at helping prevent other diseases being transmitted from people to the gorillas. So it could start a good trend in that sense.
Yes, very much so. There have been other respiratory diseases which have spread from people to gorillas, including human metapneumovirus in Rwanda. And we've had other respiratory viruses like in chimpanzees in Uganda, and actually coronavirus in Ivory Coast in 2016. It wasn't the severe one that we have right now, SARS-CoV-2, which created COVID-19, but there was another coronavirus, HCoV, human coronavirus, which was much milder, but chimpanzees got sick from people around. So it's very easy for us to make the great apes sick because we're so closely related. We share over 98% genetic material. And also recent studies have shown that we have the very same protein receptors, the AC2 protein receptors that attach to the COVID-19 virus, the SARS-CoV-2, which means that the way that it's made us human beings sick it's the same way that it would make great apes and other old world primates sick.
And have you seen instances of any gorillas catching the virus as of yet? Are there any confirmed cases?
Fortunately not. We've not seen any confirmed cases. We've been very lucky not to see any. But we've not only trained the park staff, but we've also trained who take tourists to the gorillas, but we've also trained the gorilla guardians, who are human and gorilla conflict resolution teams that safely herd gorillas back when they come outside the park. We've also trained them as well. And so they wear masks, and we put up lots of posters to tell people that if you see a gorilla in your garden, call out the gorilla guardians. And they have been trained that when they herd the gorillas, they keep a minimum of 10 meters away and they have to wear masks. So everybody knows what to do. And the village health and conservation teams, thanks to the great support we got from the Whitley Fund for Nature in 2009 when we got the Whitley Gold Award, they started the whole culture of hand washing, because when we started out, only 10% of the people had hand washing, taps, facilities, and now it's as high as 75% in some communities, 50% in others. But we started that whole ethos of hand washing. So now when COVID-19 pandemic has come around, people have now got into that habit and they've continued to spread the message, but it had already begun 10 years ago, which is great.
Yeah, so you for it to come through.
Yes.
I have so many more questions, but I'm aware that time is slipping away really fast. But there's one thing that I wanted to speak about before we started taking some questions from the audience. At WFN, we were incredibly moved when we received your newsletter a couple of weeks ago, where you condemned the brutal murder of George Floyd in Minnesota and the systemic racism which led to this unspeakable tragedy. And you also spoke in the newsletter about the Black Lives Movement in relation to conservation and in relation to your own experiences. And I wondered if you could maybe share a little more about your thoughts on this.
Yes, well, thank you I'm so glad that you were able to read it and you liked the blog that I wrote. When I saw what was happening with George Floyd and I watched his funeral on TV and I listened to what the Reverend Al Sharpton was saying, I was really moved because I felt that I studied abroad. 11 years of my life have been outside Uganda studying in different places, both in England and in America. And I faced discrimination being a minority. And sometimes I got discouraged, but most of the people I met were really, really nice. And I just ignored the negative incidences. And I wasn't the only one. My friends, my Black friends or my cousins or colleagues were also going through the same thing. And some people took it really badly and some people didn't. And that determined how far we went, I think, and how we've become in life. But I felt that the more that we keep ignoring this, because the way that George Floyd died was just so inhumane, the more that we keep ignoring this, the worse that it's not going to go away. This systemic discrimination is not going to go away, and everybody's going to suffer. Yes, people are suffering in America. Maybe it's worse in America than anywhere else. But whatever happens in America affects all of us all over the world. And I felt that it was important to speak out about it and support the Black Lives Movement. Because in Uganda, for example, there's also some form of discrimination. Even as we work with the local communities, people feel, oh, why do you have to involve the local communities in conservation? Just keep them out. But actually, if you don't involve them in conservation, they're not going to care, and they're going to keep, poaching the wildlife, cutting the forests, because they're going to say, this is your wildlife, you don't care about us. So discrimination happens at all levels, even at a local level, and it affects conservation programs a lot if you don't involve the local people who are suffering most, but stand most to benefit from having a protected habitat for the wildlife. But also the decision and policymakers within Africa, if you don't engage them actively, they'll continue to create policies where trees get cut, national parks get degazetted, and everybody suffers. So we found that it's very important to really build that leadership. And that's why I also mentioned the African Primate Society, which was founded in 2016 to build African leadership in primatology, because majority of primatologists around the world are not from the places where primates are found. Actually, a very small minority are from where the primates are found. And we found that wherever you are, the primate numbers continue to go down. Their forests keep getting cut because there's not a big enough homegrown movement in primatology. So we decided to create it together with two Whitley Award winners, actually three now. There's Inza Kone, who is the president of APS. I'm the vice president. And then Ekoge from Cameroon, who's also on the executive committee. And then there's the most recent winner, Rachel. She's also one of the founder members of APS. She's also a recent Whitley Award winner. And we held a conference in Ivory Coast, where Inza is from, the first one, and in 2019 we held one in Uganda. And also when it comes to women, you mentioned women. I'm part of the Women for Environment in Africa, which is also led by African women in conservation, where we feel there need to be a lot more African women leaders in conservation.
Thank you. Yeah, that was such a privilege to get to hear you speak about it. And yeah, I'm sure the audience share my gratitude for that. And it's really exciting to hear that so many of our other Whitley Award winners are working with you and building such amazing around the world, which is, yeah, it's really great to see. I'm just having a look. Got quite a lot of people coming through with questions. I actually had one question that came in earlier today, which I thought would be interesting to ask you. So we had a question from Annie, and she asked, are you at all worried that the change from critically endangered to endangered might in fact hamper conservation efforts and funding, or do you think it's simply a reflection of ongoing positive trajectory?
Actually, I would say at the beginning, I thought that it would hamper conservation efforts for the mountain gorillas. But then I realized that it's important to celebrate our successes, because when I first started working with mountain gorillas, there were only about 650, and now there's almost double. There's 1,063, a minimum of 1,063. So, and the mountain gorilla population is the only gorilla subspecies that's growing because of tourism, because of better healthcare for the mountain gorillas, more community conservation programs for the community, more law enforcement. And I think taking the mountain gorillas off critical, because they have a positive growth trend, will encourage other conservation programs in other places. So that's why now I realize that it's probably going to help the general effort for gorilla conservation. I actually, in February, I was very happy we won the St. Andrews Prize for the Environment, and they were very happy to see that the mountain gorilla numbers are going up, and they wanted us to help the situation with the Eastern Lowland gorillas, where it would be great to also work with some of the Whitley Award winners. However, we really can't stop. It doesn't mean we can't stop the efforts for the mountain gorillas. One thing I forgot to mention is that we lost a gorilla at the beginning of this month, Rafiki. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, with no tourism, people are very hungry, and so the poaching went up, and a poacher went into the park to eat duiker and bush pig, and he came across Rafiki and speared him. And because Rafiki had grown up seeing tourists, he had lost his fear of people, he couldn't tell the difference between a good and a bad person. So he didn't move away when the poacher came nearby, and the poacher speared him, maybe out of panic, but he shouldn't have been there anyway. And it's so sad that he died, and his group got disorganized. It's reduced from 17 to 11 at the moment because some have joined 2 other nearby groups. I mean, so it's really shocked us all because the community has benefited so much from tourism. How could they even think of killing a gorilla? So we still need to continue to conserve them. They're so few in number, just over 1,000. But if we start to show that those showing a positive growth trend move from critically endangered to endangered, according to the IUCN status, it will encourage people working with other gorilla populations to also do the same.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was, yeah, very, very good. I'm just having a look at any other questions we have that have come through. Lots of positive comments. I know that we had another question that came through earlier, which was asking for you to maybe share the best moment of when you won your Whitley Award back in 2009, the Whitley Gold Award, in fact. Yeah, what your highlight moment was from that.
I would say that my highlight moments, there were many highlight moments, but it was a time when there was a lot going on in my life. I just had a baby. So Tendo came to the Whitley Award ceremony, 2-month-old Tendo. And my mom also was able to come because she came to babysit Tendo. She was the oldest member in the audience. I remember Sir Edward Lee saying, we have the oldest and the youngest here, and they're all connected to Gladys. My mom was 80, Tendo was 2 months old. And I did, of course, that time I didn't know I was going to get the Whitley Gold Award. And when it was announced, I was so overwhelmed. It was so nice to also meet Her Royal Highness Princess Anne. And I know she likes, as much as she loves conservation, she also likes vets. And when I was at the Royal Vet College, when they celebrated 200 years, I saw her at a distance. And I also saw her more recently when the vet school actually put me on their wall of achievement. So I'm on there, and she came to open that wall. And so I was just so excited to be able to win this award. It's so prestigious, and all my fellow winners were very, very impressive. It was just, I loved the fact that we're going to get so much support. There was so much recognition. I even got a letter from the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Uganda congratulating me when I got back home. Everyone in Uganda was so excited when I was shaking the hand of Princess Anne wearing the traditional dress. So it was a win, not just for me and conservation through public health, but for the whole country.
Amazing to get to share it with your family as well. That's so fantastic.
Yes, it was so nice to have my mom and Tendo and his older brother and my sister and her son. It was very exciting to have them there.
Tendo's older brother was able to visit mountain gorillas for the first time quite recently. I remember when I spoke to you earlier. That must have been another amazing
Yes.
to get to share that part of your work with your kids.
That it was amazing to take Indigo to the mountain gorillas, because every time he's been coming to Burundi since he was 4 months old, and he was always too young to track. And I'd always get up really early to go to the gorillas. So this time round, we went with him, and he was just like mesmerized when he saw the gorillas. And when we got back, when he got his certificate, the rangers clapped very loudly because they've seen him as a little baby. And now he's old enough to see the gorillas. So they were so excited for him. And so was everybody else. And the tourists who were with at the time were also very excited. So we're so happy that he's got to see them, and I've asked him to write a story about it, which I'll share with you one day.
Please share the story. I'm sure everyone here would love to hear it as well. Well, I think, unfortunately, I don't know where the time's gone, because we seem to be almost out of time. So I suppose what's left just for me to say a huge thank you to you for taking over our social media today, and for giving us such a fascinating insight into your amazing work. It really has been fantastic to hear more about it. And for everyone listening, make sure you are ready to go buy your conservation coffee. And also do follow CTPH across social media and sign up for their newsletters. Yeah, there's the coffee, which again, so do drop us a DM link, because I can send over the link to how to get it in the UK. And if you want to find out more about what we do at WFN and support more incredible conservation leaders like Gladys, then check us out on our website, which is whitleyaward.org. And there is a link there to sign up for our newsletters, and also a place where you can donate if you'd like to. So I suppose that's...
I'd like to thank you very, very much. Sir Edward Whitley and Araminta, the whole Whitley Award team, Danny. I know Georgina left, but she's played a big role. And all of you, I'd like to thank you so much for all the great support. Danny's been to visit us with her husband, and I'd like you all to come to visit us as well, once it's safe enough to come and track the mountain gorillas again after the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, thank you so much, Gladys, and everyone for listening, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
Bye-bye,
Gladys.
and thank you for all the good support. Bye-bye.
Thank you.